Okay, well, Michael, thank you for joining us on the show for Jake Freeman TV. You are doing a speaking tour in Australia, here in Melbourne and in Sydney. Coming up, we're very excited to have you on the show and look forward to seeing you do your speaking tours here later this week. Welcome and good to see you.
Well, thanks for having me, and looking forward to arriving in Melbourne and Sydney. This is, I believe, my fourth trip to your wonderful continent, and they've always been good. I've had a lot of friends there, and I'm sure this one is going to be equally as good.
What can people expect to hear from you at your speaking tour in Melbourne and Sydney?
Well, I certainly tell them my story, how I grew up with my dad, who was the underboss of the Colombo family. My rising through the ranks, the business deals that I got involved with, some of the good, the bad, and the ugly of that life. And, there are a lot of myths about the mafia that people have, misconceptions, and they're going to get the true story from me, about, the way the mafia is run in our country. I certainly know that you do have a presence there in Australia. And then we're going to do a Q&A, and people can ask me anything that they want. I've been asked everything under the sun. I'm normally pretty good at answering questions. We have a VIP section there where I'll be interacting with a lot of people in that category. We've got some books and merchandise, and overall, we have a really good time. And I think I love interacting with the audience. I've been doing it now for over 20 years, all around the world. And like I said, last time we were there, we had a great time, and I'm sure it's going to be equally as good this time.
Well, that's great to hear. And, we love meeting people from all walks of life. And, you have such an incredible story to tell, especially for people who may not know you previously and know what you've been doing for the last 20 years, as you mentioned earlier. Let's just take it back a bit for people that don't know. You were born in the early 1950s in New York, I believe.
Yes.
Your dad was someone who was very, very well known. Tell us a bit about your dad for those who may not know the story.
Well, my dad, Sonny Franzese, was the underboss of the Colombo family back in the 60s. Extremely high profile, always a major target of law enforcement, major media, target at that point in time. So I grew up in the life, but my dad really had some tough times during the 60s. He was indicted 3 times in the state of New York, very serious crimes, went to trial 3 times, was acquitted in all 3 of those cases. And I was, my family was enduring all of this. My dad was in and out of jail, on trial, a lot of turbulence in the family. And then he was indicted in federal court for masterminding a nationwide string of bank robberies, convicted and sentenced to 50 years in prison. And, long story short, at that time, my dad did 40 years on that 50. But it was his going into prison that caused the change of direction for me, where I was initially a pre-med student going to be a doctor. And then when my dad drew that 50-year prison sentence, my life changed. And as an agreement with my dad, he actually promoted me to be part of his life so that I can help him try to get out of prison, because he was framed on that case. My dad was no bank robber. So it was a course that I had to take to try to prove his innocence. And that's how I kind of changed direction and got involved in the life. And that was in my early 20s.
There you go. And just for those who may not know the story, I think your dad was actually serving prison time right up until, I think, his 100th birthday. He was the oldest prisoner in America, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. He was actually in and out 5 times on parole violations, but he did a total of 40 years. He was finally released when his sentence expired in 2017. He was 100 years old. He was the oldest inmate, I should say, in the federal prison system in the United States. And my dad sadly passed away during the pandemic at the age of 103. He was the oldest living mob guy, made man in America at the time, and probably the oldest in the world. I don't think anybody in that life lived to that age. It's not conducive to a long lifestyle, a long life expectancy in that life. But he was an important figure.
Wasn't he? I think I saw one of your videos once. He was around, or he knew the people. At least that he lived in the time of Al Capone as well.
Well, he knew Al Capone. I mean, Al Capone originally was from New York, from Brooklyn, and my dad was born in 1917, so he did, rubbed shoulders with Al at one point. But he knew Lucky Luciano, he knew Meyer Lansky, he knew, Costello, he knew Genovese, he knew all those guys. That was his era. So yeah, and I have, a lot of stories to tell about, his relationships with them. My dad went through, a war with the Colombos. I went through one also. So we have a lot of history there that I got firsthand or that I experienced myself. And a lot of the Q&A during the shows focuses just on that. A lot of people want to know about the Kennedy killing. Was it really a mob hit? And obviously I have inside information there. They want to know about, the famous Teamster guy, Jimmy Hoffa, what really happened there. So I have information on that, and again, it's information just from my lifestyle, from experiencing it, from being around the people, from being born during that time and knowing it. So there's a lot of history there because my dad, again, he goes way, way, way back, and he and I were very close. Spent a lot of time together. I visited him for 25 years in prison. And then I had my own 20 years on the street, rubbing shoulders with the likes of Joe Colombo and John Gotti and Carmine Persico and people like that. So, between the two of us, there's a lot of history in that life.
Definitely. How far into your medical degree did you go until you dropped out to take on after your father went to prison?
I was a pre-med student, just 2 years in college, preparing actually for medical school. So I didn't get very far. It was in my sophomore year that my dad proposed me for membership in that life. Joe Colombo was the boss initially at that time. So, and I became a made member of that life at the age of 24, after being a recruit for a couple of years and doing what I had to do to prove myself capable and worthy to become a member.
Mm. And because originally your father had no intention of you wanting to go into the business. I think he said to you, you're going to, go to university, get a degree, get a good job and all that sort of thing. That was the original plan, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, he wanted me to be a doctor. He wanted me to be the first professional in the family. He was very supportive of that. He didn't want me to enter that life, but circumstances changed. And when my dad went away, it was me. I was the oldest of my brothers and sisters. I had to take care of them and my mom. And the way to do that, we had to make money. I had to get on the street and do what I needed to do to support the family and also to pay for legal bills and do the investigation necessary to try to overturn his conviction. So there was a lot to do, and I couldn't do it, being in school for 6, 7 years. It wasn't in the plan.
Growing up as a child, what age did you realize your dad wasn't your sort of typical dad? He wasn't the accountant. He wasn't, the guy down there. He wasn't, cutting grass. He was doing something very, very different for a living. What age did you sort of realize that?
Well, it was very early on because my dad had, at the time, I don't know if anybody was as highly publicized as him. He attracted a lot of media attention. And again, I was, 9, 10 years old when he started to get indicted on all of these cases and going to prison. And, one thing many things I respected about my dad, but he would never bring what was going on in the outside world into the house. In the house, we were a family, but he had law enforcement around him surveilling him 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They were parked all around our house. Couldn't miss it. Read everything in the newspaper, had fights in school when kids would call my dad a mafia dad, so it was part of my upbringing. And then always we had activity, guys coming by the house, treating my father with a lot of respect. And, me going to the Copacabana and a lot of these nightclubs and seeing the way my dad was treated. So I couldn't miss it. I knew right away he wasn't a doctor, accountant, or a lawyer. That's for sure.
But it's also worth noting too, even when you were in the underworld crime business, you actually were running legitimate businesses as well. You had think real estate, you had your own film production company, you had a lot of things going. When you were running those legit businesses, were you did you ever have sort of a moment well, this is a legitimate business, I'm doing it on the side, I'm doing all this other stuff, which is not good. Did that sort of ever cross your mind during those years?
No, I have to say that, I knew how to use the life to benefit me in business, both legal and illegal. And yeah, I had two automobile dealerships, a Mazda and a Chevrolet agency. I had a big leasing company. I was involved in a few restaurants, a nightclub. I had a big video store at the time when videos were big. And then I had a film production and distribution company. So those were the legitimate businesses that I ran. And then, I had, a gambling operation on the street. I was in the wholesale and retail gasoline business. That was actually a front for a big scam that I created with another guy for defrauding the government out of tax on every gallon of gasoline. It was the biggest, deal that I was ever involved in. It was probably the biggest deal that the mob in New York was ever involved in, or maybe in the country. It was a tremendous amount of money. So again, I was fortunate. I was kind of an entrepreneur. I understood business. And if you know how to use that life to benefit you in business, you can go a long way. And I was able to capitalize on that.
Very, very good. Anton, I appreciate that. Let me just go through the questions here. Just scrolling through very quickly. The first time you got in trouble with the law, how old were you?
I was actually 18 years old. When I first got in trouble with the law, I was a target right away. And then when I was 21 and 22, I had been indicted 4 times by the state of New York for grand larceny and fraud and everything else. Went to trial 4 times, and I was either acquitted or dismissed in each case, which kind of shows you that the government was really just targeting me because of my name at that point in time. But I went on to have 7 indictments total throughout my career on the street, I would say. I was arrested probably 18 times. I went to trial 5 times. I had 2 federal racketeering cases, one brought on by Rudy Giuliani, and I had a state racketeering case in Florida. So, I had my share of law enforcement, fights, I would say, throughout my 20 years on the street. So, and again, I was a target because of my name, but then, when I started to make a name for myself on the street, then it became even worse. And so I had to deal with that, but it's part of the life.
Yeah, it certainly was. I'm sure it was. Do you, when you look, do you ever just, I'm sure you got photos of yourself back in the day in the 70s and 80s. During that time, you must kept photos and, documents and memorabilia. Do you ever just do you ever look through that and I remember this moment, I remember that person? Do you have that somewhere at home? Like,
Oh, I remember. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things. Obviously, we have photos, but it's really, more of the memories that I have with my crew and my guys, and the ups and downs and everything that you deal with throughout your time. And I made a lot of friends, and I made a lot of money. So when you have a lot of money, you make a lot of friends, whether they're real friends or not. They're friends, across all 5 families in New York, and really in some of the families throughout the country. Because, like I said, to give you an idea of the numbers in the gas business, I ran it for about 7 or 8 years with my partner. We were selling 500 million gallons of gas a month, and we were taking down 20 to 40 cents a gallon, depending upon the deals that we made. We were pulling down $8 to $10 million a week.
Wow.
I had my own jet plane. I had my own helicopter. I had homes in 3 states in New York. I had 300 guys under me, ready to do anything I tell them to do. So I attracted a lot of attention in that regard, but I also spread the wealth around. So there was a lot of people making money as a result of the operation that I had. And, they appointed me a capo-regime or captain because of the success that I was having. So, and of course, law enforcement is watching, and boom, you become a target. There was a time when I had a task force, a government task force that had every different agency combined that would meet, twice a month. And their sole purpose was to put me in prison for life. So I became that much of a target. And I'm certainly not bragging about it. It wasn't comfortable at the time, but it goes to show you the extent the government will go to when they want somebody.
Exactly. Yeah. I can just hold their attention and everything. I first came across you, Michael, on YouTube because there was I think it was the Insider channel where they have people in previous professions that analyze and say how realistic a show or film is in the field. And of course, I came across yours on analyzing different mobster films and TV shows. Out of all the shows and films that we've done, we're talking Godfather, Godfellas, Scarface, just, The Departed. Is there any particular show or film that you feel is the most accurately depicted of the crime world and crime families?
Yes, and that happens to be a big discussion during my Q&As. People are always asking me about the various movies and so on and so forth. And yeah, I mean, I've done a number of things on YouTube with respect to that. But I think the most accurate movie is something of a surprise to everyone, and that is in 1996 HBO production of the movie Gotti. It was called Gotti. Armand Desante and Anthony Quinn. Armand played Gotti, and Anthony Quinn played Neil Delacroix, who was an important figure at that time. Extremely accurate, extremely well done. It was probably the most accurate of all the movies. So I always encourage people to watch it. You can go on YouTube and watch it for free. Then take Goodfellas. I knew all of those guys. Obviously, they mentioned me in there.
They're on
Pretty
cruise, I
accurate.
think.
Yeah, they take some dramatic liberty with it, but I knew Henry Hill well. I knew Jimmy Burke, Paulie Vario. I knew them all pretty well. So it was pretty accurate. Casino to a degree, pretty accurate. Bronx Tale, because it was Chaz Palminteri's story, who is a friend of mine, but he played Sonny in the mob tremendously well. It was a brilliant portrayal at the time. So those are the most accurate. People ask me about The Sopranos. Listen, I always sum it up by saying this: it was a great series, groundbreaking. Tony Soprano, he was amazing in his role. But if Mob Boss was ever visiting a psychiatrist, he would be in the trunk of his car by the end of the week, along with the psychiatrist. So you can kill that part of the show.
Yeah.
I kind of liked when I saw that.
What was Guarding the show you mentioned in one of your videos? I think it was accurate because you said growing up that your house was bugged by the FBI, the police, with the phone calls and everything. So a lot of the conversations you see within Gardy were pretty much almost word for word what happened with your family growing up, I believe. Is that right?
Yeah, well, in my house, when my house was being built, we had a house built. The FBI put a bug in the wall of the house while it was being built. So yeah, our house was bugged. In the Gotti case, Angelo Ruggiero was a soldier under Gotti. His phone was tapped in the house, and they had hundreds of hours of tapes on that. And then the social club, the apartment upstairs on top of Gotti's social club, was also bugged. So a lot of the script was written based upon the actual surveillance tapes and the words of the guys themselves. So it was pretty accurate. And John and I had the same attorneys at that time. He had Bruce Cutler, I had John Jacobs, but they were partners in the same office, and we were under indictment at the same time. So I would go up to the lawyer's office, and Angela was up there listening to the tapes. So I heard a lot of the tapes, and then remember how the script was written, and it was very accurate.
Hmm.
And let me mention Godfather 1 and 2. Brilliantly done, obviously, tremendous films, but they were fictional.
Hmm.
But probably two of the greatest films ever made, but fictional. And it did. The two Godfather films elevated the romanticism of that life to a huge degree.
And made it
It's the
mainstream
way.
as well.
What's that?
And made it mainstream as well.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And look, I remember when those movies came out, guys on the street were carrying themselves differently, because of the amazing performance of Marlon Brando and Pacino. It was wonderful films, no doubt.
Have you seen much of the Australian shows? There used to be a show here very popular called Underbelly, which was about the crime scene here in Melbourne in the 90s. I'm not sure if you had a chance to see or may have heard of it, Underbelly, by chance.
I did hear of it. I haven't watched much of it, but I have heard of it, yes.
Okay,
Maybe when I get over there, I'm going to be there for 12 days, so I'll have a chance to take in some of that.
Okay. This was a big show at the time when in fact, because there was a court ruling at the time, they actually had to, in some of the states, not broadcast it because it was going to interfere with the court ruling. It was a big deal at the time. But yeah, it was the first season was fantastic and had other seasons, which were good, but the first season, in my opinion, was just amazing in terms of the storylines. Like it was, I know how accurate it was play by play, but and certainly bringing the story, the characters to life, and same with the shows that you've mentioned, having people portray their real life counterparts. I thought they did an excellent job. But moving on from there, you spent, I think it was from 1986 to 1994, you were in and out of prison. You, I think, violated your parole and had to go back into prison. and during that time, you, for lack of a nicer word, found yourself. You had a bit of an awakening. If is that right?
Yeah, as part of my exit strategy from that life, when I saw the life really falling apart with the racketeering case, a lot of guys going to jail for a long time, a lot of guys turning informant. I took a plea. I got a 10-year prison sentence. It was a racketeering act, and it was based upon my gas operation. I took a plea to a 10-year prison sentence. I had a $15 million restitution, $5 million in forfeitures. I married a young girl who's now my wife of 38 years and went off to do my time. I did 5 years in prison, got out on parole, was home for 13 months. It was all over the street that I walked away from that life, and I'll explain how that happened when we do the show. And contract on my life. My father basically, turned on me a little bit at the time.
Wow.
We patched it up later, but the FBI had told me that I was a dead man. You don't walk away. People thought I was going to stop testifying. It was a mess. 13 months, I had some attempts on my life, and then make a mistake and violate my parole. They throw me back in. And I spent another 3 years, which was the maximum on the parole violation, but I spent 29 months and 7 days in solitary, 6x8 cell, 24/7. And it was during that time that this, awakening and turning around, and I became a person of faith during that time. And it kind of changed the direction of my life. It was a defining time, a defining moment in my life. And for the past 25 years, I've been speaking all over the world, writing books, doing things, hopefully to encourage people, to let them understand that they can make a turn in their life, no matter how dismal things are. And, I think I'm an example of that. I've been very fortunate, very blessed.
Exactly. Well said, and a lot of great work you're doing. And I know that you do go back to prisons to speak to the inmates there. What's
Yes.
the reception you normally get from them when you visit prisons, not as an inmate yourself, but as a motivational speaker?
Oh, it's always been extremely rewarding. For better or for worse, the mafia, Cosa Nostra, is looked at as the elite organized crime organization in the world. And so when you come in with that pedigree, people immediately pay attention. At least that's what I've seen. So I have immediate credibility with these guys. And then I go on to tell them the story and really hit them hard. I hit them right between the eyes and how they're just destroying their lives and how they can make a change. You can't tell somebody, they're doing the wrong thing without giving them hope that they can make a change. And I'm it. I'm it. And I tell people, if I can make a change in my life, because at one point in time I might have been the worst person in the room, well, then you can do it. And there is a way. And it's extremely encouraging to people. And I've been very blessed to see the reaction that I get from people, which is very rewarding. And that's what motivates me to continue.
That's wonderful to hear. I'm just quickly going through the questions because we're almost out of time, Michael. So I just want to see if there's anything else I want to quickly ask. You've answered everything so well, and I'm really happy with that. I guess just you touched on this a bit earlier, and I no doubt will mention this at your show, but just for us and people watching this program, what can you tell people? What's some parting advice you can give to people? People who may have done the wrong thing, people who've done time, people who just make very poor judgments. What's the best advice? I think you would be the best example of this because, in your previous line of work, most people don't make it out to the end as you have done so. Most of them die or end up in prison for life. So what's the advice to tell people while they can still get out while it's early?
Well, there's a couple of things, especially with our young people. I tell them this, in this life, we are who we hang out with. And first of all, you got to pick your friends wisely. Very, very important. Pick people that are not going to bring you down, but are going to put you in the right direction. Secondly, who you are accountable to in life is the direction or the path that your life is going to take. When I was on the street, I was accountable to my boss, to my oath. As a result, I was a criminal. When I got out and I changed that accountability, I'm accountable first to my God, my wife, my kids to do the right thing, keep me on track. So that's so important. And one of the saddest things that I encounter so often, especially when I go into prisons, is that guys that are in their 50s, 60s, women, Michael, I've been in and out of prison for the past 20 years. I really don't have anything on the outside. What am I going to do with my life when I get out? It's very, very sad. And what I tell people is life is tough enough when everything is good, everything is great. And then all of a sudden, boom, we have a pandemic. Everything is great. And all of a sudden, boom, we have an earthquake, we have a flood, we have, God forbid, a cancer diagnosis, things that you can't control. So if you do the wrong thing and suffer consequences, you put more baggage on your shoulders to carry around, and life becomes very, very difficult. So the choices that you make in life are so important. We only get through this life one time. You got to make it as productive on yourself as you possibly can, because the consequences are very severe. And before you know it, your life is over. So I tell them I was very fortunate. I was 40 years old when I finally, the bell went off and I said, hey, what am I doing? So I'm 72 now. And for the last 30 years, even though I've had challenges and so on, my life is pretty blessed, and anybody can make that turnaround if they're determined to do it. And that's what I encourage them to do.
Michael, that's really well said, and great to hear. And from one question to another, God bless you for doing the great work you've been doing for the last 20, 30 years, and helping people in every way possible. That's all the questions I have, and pretty much all the time we have left. So thank you so much for your time, for doing this on short notice. I look forward to seeing you at the show in Melbourne here. And yeah, just thank you so much for your time, and we really appreciate all the great work you've been doing.
Well, thank you. And I encourage people to come. We're going to have a real good time in Melbourne. Melbourne's my favorite city. I got to be honest. And I have to say this. There's a restaurant there called 38 Chairs. Are you familiar with it?
Yeah, I've heard of it.
Okay. Gino is the owner. The food is tremendous. And Gino has invited me back. We're going to go there and eat in Melbourne. And we're going to stay at the Crown Hotel, Crown Casino again. And so please, anybody that's in town, come and visit with me. We're going to have a great night that night.
Well, I'll add the links and I'll add that to the chat in our YouTube videos. But again, it's a great restaurant, a great place, and so is Crown. Well, again, Michael, we look forward to seeing you, and thank you so much once again for joining us on Jake Freeman TV, and can't wait to see you.
All right, my friend. Thanks for having me. You take care.
Thank you, Michael. Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.